Hello, fellow seekers. Welcome back to the Law of One Spiritual Advice Podcast. My name is El, and I return to speak on some spiritual philosophy and the Law of One and my life experience and how I interpret these quotes. So today, I think I have a good one, which I've brought up a few times in the last few podcasts, and I found the quote that I was trying to quote. So this today is going to be about how we hold biases and distortions in our mind, and often, in order to undistort these biases, we actually need to go further down the road of distortion. In other words, we need to distort our distorted minds in order to find the folly within the distortion and then lead to further truth. In other words, you kind of need to go down the path that maybe you don't want to for a bit, a stumbling block, so that you can realize that's the wrong path that not the wrong path, but it's not the path that you'd like to be on, and therefore you can make a change. A new opportunity may come. So in that light, I have a few things written down, and these are some things that I may or may not talk about, but we're going to relate this to how you're angry and frustrated and how we can deal with that, because that is a distortion within us. So we're going to use that as an example. I like to sort of trigger people and say you are what you hate in that regard, because you're identifying with non-acceptance. And if everything is the creator, then you kind of should accept everything as the creator, and your denial of that thing as non-creator, as non-acceptance, is a distortion within you. So, continuing on, we know if you're going to go distortion, we need to hit rock bottom. There's also, are the things that happen to us that sort of lead to distortion, distortion of mind, of body, of spirit, are they self-imposed growth by your higher self, or are they possibly a negative attack from a evil negative entity? And then, I guess that's probably what we're going to talk about. So without further ado, I'm just going to drop the quote on you because it's a real quick and short one. So this is in the Law of One material, the raw material. You can find that on my website, theoneinfinitecreator.com, and I have links to the LL Research group who provides us all of this for free. Thank you to them. So this is from session 104.2, and Ra says, "It is the way of distortion that in order to balance a distortion, one must accentuate it." End of quote. So very quick, very short, just getting to the point. So the way I would like to sort of position this to you is to explain it like this. So say you have a small distortion, a small bias within you. Where we are, none of us are perfect, right? We all have our issues and the things where we know that we need work on. But there are some things within us that we're not totally conscious of. They may be, I would just consider them like small distortions. They're just small biases within us. But as we grow and progress, it is time to undistort those distortions. We need to become unbiased. And so what happens sometimes is that the small distortion can go unnoticed. And so then balance is never achieved. Then what would you like to do? Well, we can increase the distortion, whether your higher self is doing it or a negative thing is trying to test you. Basically, you can increase that distortion, which basically makes the distortion larger. It makes it harder to avoid within the denial of your mind. And, you can sort of be like, hey, now the distortion is in front of my face. I can't ignore it. What is this about? I need to think about this and my life and how I may accept these energies within myself so that they don't cause chaos and disharmony within me. Because it may not be so obvious at first that the small distortion is causing issues in your life, but once the distortion increases, it's less difficult to ignore. And in other words, it's sort of put in front of your face like, hello, I have some issues and I need to realize that this distorted attitude doesn't serve. And so how can I go about balancing this distortion within myself? And with that, I have a quote from session 46.9 where they use as an example of how to balance a distortion such as what I'm trying to explain. In other words, they're going to use the example of anger or frustration in this one. So the idea is that if you feel angry throughout the day or frustrated or really any time, obviously that is a common theme with a lot of us. And so how will we work with this energy? Well, we need to go within the self and find the root of that distortion. And so there's a bit of a trick that they sort of give you to doing this. So in session 46.9, the questioner is asking about how they, have anger within themselves. Actually, I think it was for the scribe, for Jim. But anyways, he has a question about how he deals with anger and how they could maybe balance that within the self. So Ra gives an example of how a positive entity would use the catalyst of anger and sort of to increase the distortion in the self in order to find the folly of the energy. So they state here, quote, "The entity polarizing positively perceives the anger. This entity, if using this catalyst mentally, blesses and loves this anger in itself. It then intensifies this anger consciously in the mind alone until the folly of this red ray energy is perceived not as folly in itself, but as energy subject to spiritual entropy due to the randomness of energy being used. Positive orientation then provides the will and the faith to continue this mentally intense experience of letting the anger be understood, accepted, and integrated with the mind-body-spirit complex. The other self, which is the object of anger, is thus transformed into an object of acceptance, understanding, and accommodation, all being reintegrated using the great energy which anger began." End of quote. So this talks more about this balancing technique that they talk about in other quotes. And I didn't really want to make this whole podcast about the balancing technique because that can get long. But this is just an example of how they say that, you have the anger within yourself. So you're angry and frustrated. I would consider that a small distortion, increasing in distortion within you. It's sort of bubbling up in the emotions and trying to get the attention of the self to say that, hey, there's something here in the environment that I'm having trouble accepting. And so I'm going to bubble up this anger into the conscious awareness of self so that it can no longer be ignored and so that I can deal with this catalyst and grow. And so it's noted that there are, on this third density that we are in, there's sort of two paths to the creator. There's the positive path and the negative path, and I am here to try to explain to you about the positive path. So I'm going to sort of leave the negative path out of this because that too can get really complicated in explaining. But just know that the negative path does a very similar thing, but they work with control instead of acceptance. And so just wanting you to note that in this light, this is more geared towards acceptance of self, acceptance of all as the creator, because that is, in my understanding, the larger truth, the truth of unity, which is that all is one, and therefore, why deny and control the one? It's better to accept the one and realize that all is one and all is perfect, and, there's just a bunch of free will entities with different masks running around pretending to be the creator. And so where you see something and you want to control it as like this is not of the creator or this is not perfect, that's sort of your non-acceptance of the creator, and in which case that's like a negative feedback loop which comes back to you, adds more catalyst to your life so that you can learn to accept the creator as is. And that is, well, as it is. I mean, you just accept things. So, of course, easier said than done, as I say. But I guess I should just point out, if you're not aware of what red ray energy is, it is, they're just talking about chakras. So the energy comes in through the 7 chakras, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. So your first reaction to anything is going to be the red ray, which is in terms of survival. In terms of your very basic instincts. So, of course, if you're feeling angry, much of it is going to be in these lower chakras. And it's, I guess the idea is that if you're, of non-acceptance and having this red ray energy increase within you, I see that as a a blockage at a certain point within you. And so what's the idea of accepting and doing all this fancy metaphysical thinking within your mind? Well, the idea is to move the energy up from the bottom red ray throughout your body, to the higher centers to make more sense of the vibration instead of just having the vibration or the river or whatever you want to think of it as just be stopped and pooled in one area. We want it to flow through us. We want it to flow through us. So we want to work with the anger understand it, see where it's born from. It's born from a non-acceptance of usually free will in others. We want to see them do well, we want to see them do good, and they are acting out in ways which annoy us and cause anger, and therefore we want to control them. But my understanding is control isn't the path of the positive path, and so we need to learn to accept them. And how do we learn to accept them? Well, it's not easy. We have to usually kind of hit rock bottom in terms of self and the way we understand things, and the way that we are frustrated with others, and sort of throw the hands in the air and go, oh geez, oh man, I don't know what the hell's going on here. All I know is that I can just try to be love and try to accept people as they are, and try to deliver truth where I can, and so be it. To try too hard, is to sort of try to control the circumstances, and my understanding is we would like to discipline ourselves, but we don't necessarily need to control. That to control is the negative trait. To accept is the positive trait. We accept, which allows us to integrate the energy and thus grow with it, instead of just be baffled by the energy and repeat these lessons over and over, getting angry, not really bringing it into the conscious awareness, denying that the anger is anything to do with our part of accepting the other selves who are causing us anger, and instead just deny that and say, it's that other person's fault. Well, then you're just going to repeat the lesson over and over, get more frustrated, more angry, until you hit some sort of rock bottom, or hit some sort of explosion within yourself, which makes the anger release, and the catalyst is released upon the world. Your distortion is released upon the world, and technically sometimes that's, although you're going to cause issues, it's still your distortion being let out on the world will come back to you, like karma does, right? And that coming back to you and smacking you in the face with your own distortion of things that you've created is going to be a wake-up call as to, oh wow, I sort of caused all of this, and it was my anger which is not helping this situation. And I should probably learn to transform the anger and understand it and learn from it, rather than just let it control me. So, continuing on, in session 80.4, they speak of balance, and I guess I pulled this quote because they use the word accentuate in it again, and they just talk about how balance is basically knowledge of self. And in this quote as well, they do bring up a negative entity attacking the channeler, Carla. So, whenever I talk about this stuff, whenever I bring up these quotes in podcasts, on the Instagram page, it's difficult because I do know that there is truth in them, but I do know that the way that I thought about these things at first, and sort of the psychosis that they can bring upon thinking too hard about, something attacking you, a negative entity that you can't see attacking you. So what I want to sort of deliver in understanding is that if a negative entity is attacking you, or whether something is coming from you and your higher self to challenge you for growth, there really is no difference between the two. They are all the creator offering you catalyst, and it is up to you as to how you will react to that catalyst. And so a lot of that will have to do with acceptance. But here we go. So I'm going to read you 80.4, and then I'll maybe elaborate a bit more. So questioner asks, what is the reason for the fact that the entity is able to act through physical distortions that are already present, as opposed to being unable to act on an entity who's had no physical distortions at all? And just stop quote for a moment. I need to explain that. So what they're saying is, in my opinion here, they're just starting to say, like, the Carla had a bunch of distortions within her mind and body already. Like, she was born with sort of like rheumatoid arthritis or whatever. And so that's a distortion that a negative entity can sort of use within her to increase that distortion in order to hurt her. But then still, once again, whether that catalyst is to hurt you or not, it's how you deal with the catalyst and the way she is able to accept it and work with it, that it's it can kind of be transformed into a good thing. The negative attack can be a revelation of the distortion that we hold within ourselves, and allow us to finally recognize that distortion and try to heal it. So Ra answers, I am Ra. The key to this query is the term distortion. Any distortion, be it physical, mental, or spiritual in complex nature, may be accentuated by the suggestion of one able to work magically, that is, to cause changes in consciousness. This entity has many physical distortions. Each in the group has various mental distortions. Their nature varies. The less balanced the distortion by self-knowledge, the more adeptly the entity may accentuate such a distortion in order to mitigate against the smooth functioning and harmony of the group. End of quote. So the reason why I wanted to pull that is this really end part right here. The less balanced the distortion by self-knowledge, the more adeptly the negative entity may accentuate such a distortion in order of, in the other self, in order to mess with them, basically. So you see, the knowledge of self, to know thyself, as it is often said, to learn from anger, to use the world as a mirror to understand the self. So when you see things that come up in your life that cause you anger, that trigger you, that cause non-acceptance in you in some way, those are a gift. And that gift is to offer you the gift of self-knowledge so that you may balance yourself better, so that you may pull the undistorted thoughts and emotions and feelings and physical things within yourself and bring them to the light, the conscious awareness of your understanding, and heal them, as opposed to running in circles. And then in session 101.4, this is just continuing on how I want to sort of just reiterate further that whether catalyst distortion is coming to you from the higher self or a negative attack, all is the creator, all is catalyst towards polarization, towards your chosen polarization, which is, service to others or service to self, which service to others includes service to self, whereas service to self is exclusionary of service to others. Someone always asks that. Okay. In session 101.4, the questioner asks, thank you. I will make a statement as to the way I see the action, and I would request Ra's comment. I see the present position as the creator knowing itself presently using the concept of polarization. We seem to accentuate or to produce catalyst to increase the desired polarization, whether the mechanism be random, through what we call the higher self, or through the services of an oppositely polarized entity acting upon us with catalyst. All of these seem to produce the same effect, which is more intense polarization in the desired direction once that direction has been definitely chosen. And they go on a little bit more, but Ra answers, yes, we find your observations unexceptional and in large correct. And then they continue on and they ask, what was the nature of the catalyst that was offered to them in this scenario that they're talking about? And basically Ra says, the nature of the catalyst is such that there is only one source. For the catalyst and experience are further attempts at specificity in dealing with the architecture of the unconscious mind of the self. Therefore, in an incarnational experience, the self as creator, especially the higher self, is the base from which catalyst stands to offer its service to mind, body, or spirit. In the sense which we feel you intend, the source was fifth density negative friend, which had noted the gradual falling away of the inharmonious patterns of the distortion called anger frustration in the entity. End of quote. So once again here, they're just saying that, whether the catalyst that is offered to you, the challenges you may call them, whether they're offered to you from a negative entity which seeks to attack you, or whether they're offered to you from the higher self, really all begins within the higher self, and all those distortions begin with you and your higher self, and the negative entities just sort of work with those distortions to increase them, which ironically, right, you can see it as an attack, but the negative entities are doing you a service in that they're basically using your shadow side against you until you realize that the shadow side can be used in that manner, and instead you light up that shadow with light and truth and understanding and integrate that part of yourself instead of denying that it exists and allowing it to cause more distortion in you. And so I hope that made some sense about how you can find truth through the chaos, how you can find truth through distorting the distorted within you, distorting it to a level that brings it to your awareness and, allows you hopefully they state here, if you're on the positive path should give you the will and the faith to keep on with that mentally exhaustive process. And I should mention that it is mentally exhaustive to, I was thinking this to myself the other day, like what we're doing is sort of spiritually gaslighting ourselves constantly. If you don't know what gaslighting is, it's sort of like to turn the blame on yourself for things that that you didn't necessarily do, and that's true. Like the creator is a massive gaslighter, aren't they? If they're putting us out into the world and demanding that we accept every distortion as a part of the self so that we may accept, rather than that we demand and control and try to force into some sort of vision that we see. We're forced to see all the negative things, all the things that suck in the world and that are obviously of non-harmonious nature, and we have to internalize that catalyst and yeah, basically just gaslight yourself into being like, well, I know this is terrible, this distortion out in the world, but I can't necessarily do anything about it. And so instead of letting it destroy my mental state, I should learn to go within and accept these things and learn where they come from, learn what they have to teach me about myself, about how my triggers, will show the biases within me as to where I need more work done. And so all the negative catalyst in the world is a gift if you can see it that way. And like I said, it's not easy. I myself seems a lot more lately, having a little bit of trouble pushing forward and keeping on, because it is a pretty chaotic time in the world where I'm, sort of being forced to internalize a lot of things outside of me, which I do not necessarily want to accept as true, but they are as they are. And so, it's a difficult thing, and I wish you guys the will and the faith to carry on, be kind to yourself. I should mention that, especially this week or the last 2 weeks, I was even a little bit sick, feeling a little bit down. And I would read a comment left maybe on the podcast or on Instagram, or somebody sent me a DM, a message, and they've just mentioned that basically, hey, thank you for your daily efforts. And I just wanted to mention that, this really helps me. And so, yeah, thank you. And when I read something like that, it's enough to pick me back up and be like, look, I know that this is difficult, Elle, but you have to keep going because you know that it's right. And the more that you do it, the more that it shows that it is right, and the more that you get the feedback that it's the right thing to do. But I do want to let you know that there is often times that I want to give up, and I want to sort of say, what's the point in all of this, and just be, just give up, hit the rock bottom thing. And I could do that, but I'm sure I would just be back in a month if that happened, once I realized the folly of the energy where that is being born from. So anyways, I guess I just wanted to thank you guys for reminding me of all the, the positives of I guess what I'm doing, and that they're helpful. And I just know that I'm human and I need to hear those things sometimes too. And so I really, from the bottom of my heart, I thank you guys so much for the encouragement. I like to offer you encouragement, but as it is with service to others, none of us are perfect. It goes both ways. The beauty of service to others is that none of us will be in a constant perfect state. And so if we're there to support each other, to lift each other up, it becomes so much easier. You don't have to be on point all the time. Somebody will come around, give you that hug when you need it. If they're not, consider this a metaphysical hug right now. I love you so much. Thank you so much for listening. You guys, if you appreciate the podcast, give it a like, give it a share, subscribe, leave me a comment. And if you find value in what I do, I would appreciate if you jumped on my Patreon or sent me a one-time PayPal. Definitely keeps all of this going. And, your service in that area allows me to give this to free to everybody else. And so, for those who have abundance to share, thank you. You allow all of this effort to be more widely, freely given, and I thank you so much from the bottom of my heart, especially as the first of the month is coming up, and those donations will come out of your accounts. And so thank you. I paid for a year of, or did I pay for 2 years of the website? I don't know. Very recently I had to drop a few $100s on the website. So, it really goes a long ways. You're supporting this. We're able to route hundreds or even thousands of people to the LL research material, which is what I sought to do, as to share the Creator as it is known to myself. And when I found the Law of One, it very much gave me a lot of understanding as to how to make sense of myself and the Creator and this whole world. And so, I just wanted to share that with others. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm doing this. So thank you guys. I love you, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of the week. Take care.